This is kind of fun too, because I forgot to tell you that I don't do too much of an intro. We typically dive right into these podcasts. So today's guest, Nina, I'm excited to talk to you about your journey from raising tadpoles into frogs into changing them into Pokemon cards when you were very young into now you're on the path to changing the world really from a longevity health standpoint, and you're well on your way to becoming $1 billion company for sure. I really think that this is going to be a cornerstone of everyone's health kit as they start to go along. So I'm excited because you went on this entrepreneurial journey, and I want to talk about the crazy steps that you probably had to go through because you were in dancing creative agency, and then look in 2017 it looks like you started to shift into health, and then suddenly poof, you've got this amazing company that forms, and took you a little while to get going. So I do want to get into that journey, but the first part of the journey, and I'm kind of surprising you with this information, or not really, but we connected on LinkedIn because I saw that you were a Draper alumni. And so I wanted to talk about your experience of how was it. For those of you that don't know, Draper University is a Silicon Valley accelerator that you go there and you live there for 6 weeks. And one of the weeks you actually get trained by Navy SEALs, and they have you do all sorts of crazy stuff. So let's dive into that. How was your experience there? What were the big
Yes.
takeaways?
Oh, Draper was wild. I loved it. I actually particularly loved the 4 days of survival training, as they call it. It was
Yep.
brilliant. They push every single boundary they can, both physically and mentally. So I think it's the ultimate thing to do before you're deciding to be an entrepreneur. I did way later. Well, we did this startup competition, and this was part of the rewards uh, of it. So I initially declined twice, and then I thought, okay, look, I've never done a US program. Let me do it, and I
Yeah.
definitely didn't regret it. It was brilliant, and I think the attitude is very different to Europe. In a way, you're kind of encouraged to, how would you say? I think the main message is make or break. So it's kind of like either you're going to come up on top or we're going to destroy you in the process, which is actually a really fast way of figuring out if something's going to work or if entrepreneurship is for you, because it will
Right.
push all of your boundaries. So I think everybody should do it, especially I would even say in much younger age. But it's great. Their attitude is it's a nice mindset shift. Yeah, I enjoyed it, and it was definitely intense, more intense than any of the programs where they're more focused on just the kind of educational learning. It was very
Right.
practical learning.
It
So that
yeah, it
was
really
quite
was.
cool.
It is that time compression thought process of if you think it's going to take you 5 years, what can you do to make it happen in 2 years? And it's
Yeah,
a fail forward and fail fast mentality.
yeah, very, very US, very different to Europe. And I've been an entrepreneur in Europe for 14 years now. So I actually prefer the US mindset. Um, and
Very interesting. So in Europe, is it much more of the let's lay out our 5 year plan, and here's our strategic decisions, and we're sticking with them, and we won't pivot and shift until the end kind of thing? Is that what you're meaning?
Well, failure is not encouraged. So I remember I was
Mm,
18. I'm 33 this year, so it feels like a lifetime ago. But my first company ran out of money within 6 months, and that was a tragic failure in a way. And it took me 2 years just to recover mentally, but also how you look at it from the outside. It's not like, okay, well, just go do it again and learn a lesson. It was very much, this should never happen. And it's kind of like you always see it's whatever mistake you made, it's not like that you're gonna learn and then not repeat it. It's more like, this is your fatal flaw. That was kind of the mindset. And this was in Croatia. I'm originally in Croatia. Actually, I'm here on holiday at the moment, hence the nice nature background.
oh yeah.
I'm usually in an office.
It's okay. Nature is so much better for everyone.
Yeah, it's a nice shift. It's a nice change. And then it was in the UK, from university onwards, and there the mindset is shifting. I think they're getting more and more adapted to this entrepreneurship where you can learn by making mistakes and trying is encouraged, but it's not as open as the US
Yeah.
in a way. So,
And would you say, I've looked into it a little bit, you come from an entrepreneurial family. Is the entrepreneur families there multi-generational? And is that kind of what you're talking about? Is that failure isn't really an option because family businesses are passed down from generation to generation?
not so much. I do come from an entrepreneurial family. So my grandfather had the first computer company in former Yugoslavia. And
Oh,
then
wow.
both of his sons, my dad and my uncle, were entrepreneurs. And actually, my uncle is the first one who sold his company, a tech company. He actually sold it to the government. And then both of my parents are scientists. So my father started this private research institute, which is actually where we developed this technology that we productized a few years ago. But really, this is multi-generational in the way that the technology took multiple generations to develop. But
Yeah.
there wasn't a business as in a commercial entity to it apart from a few years ago. But maybe even going back to my uncle who had this successful exit and had a bunch of money that he was thinking, what is he going to do? So he invested in another company that failed. And after that, a second company failed, he never recovered. It's kind
Ah,
of been, and I think it's a mental block that happens in a way you just
yes.
never try in that way again because you know you go through this terrible failure. And I think that's where it's different. In the US, you are allowed to fail and try again. In Europe, once you failed, you're a failure. um, and
Interesting.
I think that's quite unfortunate because there's so much more learning you have from negatives than from positives. From positives in the way you're not prepared for what's going to come because it's never all, it's never all lucky or, you know. So I think the failures prepare you more than the successes, and unfortunately, we discourage that a lot.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've learned way more through my failures than I have through my successes. Success actually becomes predictable and easy because there's a proven thing. If you do the thing consistently, you will
Yeah.
most likely achieve your goal as long as it's a reasonable goal. Failure, however, is unpredictable, and it's the things that you don't see. And so they have the biggest learning opportunities. That every failure that I've had is been my biggest learning lesson. Beautiful. And so in the transition to your company, you had one failure and then a little bit of time in between. What helped you heal that mentality? What helped you get over your roadblock that you can share with others that if they're stuck in that similar spot, like
Yeah.
what are the tips and tactics that you did?
Well, I was definitely depressed for 2 years, and I was a broke university student. Uh, but at the same time, I taught myself how to program, and then I did venture into something. I just never. So in the first business, I raised about 20K of sponsorship from different drink companies. It was an events company. I was, that was how you made money when you were a teenager. Um, in the second businesses I tried, I didn't ask anybody for any money because I didn't want to lose anyone's money. And actually, when you officially open up a company in Croatia, you have to put down a deposit, which was 2,000 euros. And that was paid by my dad. And I only returned it to him 7 years after when I had the other successful company. So it kind of stayed in a way that I didn't dare to take anybody else's money for anything I was trying. I also always build it from very bootstrap, maybe selling a service first, then creating a product, and then scaling that product. And in between, I had a lot of software tech startup tries that didn't end up making a lot of money. They were nice software, but it didn't really go anywhere. And then I think this was my last year of university. I had the first business that started to scale. So we were on the road to making our first million. And that was a horrible year because it was my last year of university. We had the successful, business that was scaling. I think that was my first burnout. But the business
Ah,
was really successful. A few years afterwards, the year after, it was a multi-million profitable business because it was all bootstrapped. Um, but in that business, I fell out with a co-founder. I
yep.
don't know if the Wi-Fi is. How's the
Nope, you're
Wi-Fi?
good.
I'm good. Okay. So that was my lesson on, how you pick your co-founders. And the business continued once I left, but I pretty much left without anything.
Oh no.
After taking 5 years to build a multi-million business from nothing. It's okay. It was a lesson because the experience you have, I went into a very similar industry and I just re-implemented that experience. And in our first year, we were a profitable multi-million business in this second company I started. So, once you've learned how something works, how an industry works, you can just replicate it. And in that case, I had a good business partner. So I think it's just the fact that, you are scarred when something didn't work out, but as long as you can accept that fear and try again, you could be surprised. So my first business partner was terrible. My second business partner was brilliant. He was the best business partner I could find. And if I didn't dare to try again and partner with somebody in business, that probably would have never happened. So I think it's just kind of accepting the learning and trying one more time
Yeah. Where would you
wholeheartedly.
say that your drive comes from? Is that something that you think you learned from your parents as far as watching them grind through things, or where did that come from?
Oh, yeah, definitely my parents. So not all of them. My mom's not an entrepreneur. She's a pure hardcore scientist, but she's always worked 24/7. And she's always been this example to us. Both of them have, but maybe even more my mom than my dad, where they just live for what they do and they really love what they do. And it's kind of a lifelong learning thing. So I think in terms of finding something you're passionate and then kind of passionately sticking to it and letting it guide you wherever it goes, that's definitely from them. And when you have this example, it's really hard to do something different in a way because you see how basically my parents are quite young. um, I think my dad was 20 when I was born. My mom was 24, so they were
Oh yeah.
kids. They were really young, and we saw all of their, we saw them go from students to uh, their own individual successes. So it was seeing that whole journey firsthand. I think inspired me and just gave you this discipline, knowing that if you stick to something, it will lead to somewhere good. And that's the example my brothers had later on, because I had a little brother who's also an entrepreneur. Well, two of them are, but one of them lived with me and was with me from like when we started the business with nothing to 5 years later be quite successful. And when I asked him about it, that's what kind of made him also go into business and realize that he can't do it because he could, kind of see it firsthand.
Nice.
So I think this firsthand experience is quite important.
Yeah. I mean, and you've probably said this to your investors as well as, like my true north is to solve these problems. Like there's no quitting. There's just different paths to get to my end result of the way that I want it to go. And it's what's driven me through my failures is just that weirdness of, I know that I have an idea of an end result that I want to achieve. And there's 20 different ways to get there. And I'm just going to keep picking different paths until the one path leads me to that one end goal that I want, so to speak. So
Yeah, that's
beautiful.
definitely the Draper mentality. They had a verse for it, which was fail, fail, and fail again until you succeed, or something of the sort.
Yeah, exactly. This is where I quiz you on the ten commandments of Draper. My gosh, it almost brings up a trauma loop of like
Oh
that
yeah,
freezing of like,
100%.
oh gosh, why do I have to remember these?
Yeah, did you have to, whenever somebody in our team was late in the morning, we had to jump in this freezing pool
Yep,
in October.
yep,
So I don't know.
punishment. Yep.
Well, we were in the pool quite often with the group.
Oh, that's funny. Did you
I
have some
mean,
people on your team that were not stellar on top of their game?
they were not the morning type, let's put it this way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, we had one person, she went on her own schedule, we'll put it that way, and she did not care about the community culture. She did not care about being told what to do and where to be and when. And so it
yeah,
was literally our whole team was like, okay, where is she? Like every single day it was the where is she? How can we go find her? How can we bring her over here? Because she would just like randomly wander off and she got lost in the woods when we were out in survival week, like all of these things, like
yeah.
it was like we had to babysit her to get it. So yeah, we had to jump into the pool a few times as well, but at the same time it makes your day a little bit better when you get nice and cold and refreshed from the cold water.
Yeah, it teaches you how to work with very different characters,
Yeah, that
especially
was
when you're
really fun.
forced to work with all these kind of very different personalities, and then all of them are entrepreneurs themselves, and they run
Yep.
their own companies. So we were a team of six, having somebody be the lead, a different person every day,
Yep.
with all these people who don't like to follow is
Yes,
quite
very much so.
a unique challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, on that very first exercise, it was the very first day that we were there, and they make you do the thing where you have to like stay linked up, where you're like tied together,
Yeah.
and you have to go on the treasure hunt around the city.
Yeah.
That was such an eye-opening experience of leadership of everyone who thinks that they're the dominant person, and you're all tied together, and you're trying to solve these problems, and people trying to talk over the top of each other, and we had one guy try to pull us out into the middle of traffic into the street. Like he's just like, screw you guys, I'm going to take charge. And he like walked out into the middle of traffic and pulled us in. And it was just such an interesting experience of, oh, okay, well,
Fun.
how do we
Yeah.
navigate this?
Yeah.
Fun.
Interesting.
So yeah, I wanted to jump in and talk a little bit about the future of health because to me this is extremely important of the innovation is happening faster than we can actually understand. And the cool news is especially with what you guys are doing, a lot of people understand inflammation now. But tell me, from your standpoint of your company, what is the
Yeah.
future of medicine? What is the future of health? And how are you guys helping facilitate that action?
So I think the main difference is we look at a part of biology that hasn't really been looked at before. So we never had these tools that could help us preempt the problem and also personalize an intervention. So the future of it will be preventive personalized medicine. And I think that's uniquely going to be unlocked with this part of biology. Rather we do it or somebody else does, is this is what the technology potential of it is. And to simplify, it's easier to talk about inflammation than glycobiology, and we can dive into both. But how we measure inflammation today, it's very reactive. It's when it's already apparent, it's already chronic at a certain level, and it's usually due to a cause. It can be an infectious cause, it can be a cardiovascular cause, but the inflammation is already there because the disease is already there. With this technology, we can look at inflammation in the future. So we can measure it when it's very, very low grade. It's basically a dysfunction of your immune system or an aging immune system, something you call inflammaging, where it would preempt the problem up to 10 years ahead of time. So we know where this inflammation will go. Will it go into hypertension, autoimmunity, cancer, something else? All of these diseases have different signatures. And in this case, it's not usually inflammation is very generic. You measure it, you have inflammation, you don't really know what is
Right.
the cause of it. In this case, it can be quite specific. Like when we look at hypertension, it has a certain, we call it glycosylation signature. So this kind of language that we have on top of our uh, immune molecules that would show that with 98% accuracy that somebody is heading towards hypertension in 6 years' time, or that somebody is heading towards rheumatoid arthritis with 92% accuracy 10 years ahead of time. So it can be quite specific. And it gives you a window to prevent the problem before it occurs. And it's very different to genetic risk factors, because that's something that's fixed. You're born with it. This is something that would change how you function beyond your genes and beyond epigenetics. And epigenetics is how your genes are turned on and off throughout life. This is something that changes how you work beyond that and incorporates immediate environment or the last couple of weeks and months of your environment, so it can adjust your function. And all disease is in a way compensating for some kind of imbalance that would later on
Right.
turn into a full-fledged disease. But this is your body adapting to your environment in a way to preserve itself. And if you can identify what's making it adopt itself in this unhealthy way, you can change that at core versus what we do now, and we wait for a diagnosis, which means a certain organ has already lost function, and then we treat that for the rest of your life, but it's very hard to go backwards.
Yeah, beautiful. And I love this because, some of the key points that this thought process really helps me predict the future is that you can do the 10-year thing. And I think you guys are up to 72 diseases, right? That you've had strong correlations with that you can reliably predict the future of. And so this is really powerful when we think of the shift of disrupting current healthcare systems, of going from a wait until something's wrong and we treat it, to now suddenly we have predictive analysis. In the future, no one should be actually getting sick. We should start to recognize that they're actually going down the path to sickness, and we can apply prevention and mitigation techniques with lifestyle rather than aggressive. The last thing someone wants to do is chemo, right? And so if we can get these lifestyle interventions to happen, and a lot of times too, like I would love to talk to you guys about this. When we look at heart attack victims and we look at major health events for people, there's still only 20 to 30%, depending on which research project that you look at, that take that information and actually make the full lifestyle shift. So what are you guys seeing as far as, now that you guys have been doing this for quite a few years, what have you seen has this been more receptive because of the style that you guys are doing, rather than someone waiting for a heart attack to change their life? Are people taking action steps by gathering this information?
I think that's a really, really hard one. So the people we have using it now are people who proactively come to us, because it's not paid by the healthcare system. It's paid by you. It's cash pay. It's your personal money. So even when we look at this, because we have this aging clock, this inflammation clock, so we can, in a way, measure how fast your body is aging, or your immune system, which is the main thing that keeps you alive. And if we look at this in biobanks, and we developed this clock in biobanks by analyzing over 200,000 people. And in biobanks, the average person is his age. Or if you're average good, you're 9 years younger. If you're average bad, you're 9 years older. The average person from the people who buy this test commercially is 7 years younger. So there's a healthy user bias. It's already people who are healthy who are buying this to become more healthy or to manage their health proactively. So that, if you take that from that population, which is already proactive and is willing to make investments that most people are not making, and you apply it to everyone, I do not know what the effect will be. I think that's what the difference is. Instead of us telling you, hey, you have hypertension now and you should go on this drug, it's, you will have this problem. So it's kind of like an early warning system. So you have an opportunity to react. Again, physicians are not really trained in preventive health or nutrition, so their advice on what you should do is not great yet, but we are going in that direction. How well will people comply? Even if you look at compliance to the medications that you're prescribed, it's not great. A big part of the patient population is not actually compliant with their medication. So I think that's to do with psychology. And I think that's the missing piece in healthcare. Because what we figured out that the profiles that predict hypertension would respond to physical activity. We did a study with 1,000 people doing different types of exercise, and we found that basically it didn't matter what type of exercise you did, as long as it was consistent, you reduce these cardiac risk factors. So there's a solution to it. And then we find that what predicts insulin resistance or diabetes responds to weight loss and caloric restriction. So there's preventive solutions to both of these very common things. Will people apply it if they have this? No, yes, I think the consumers we have right now do, and they're doing this, very actively and benefiting from it. But if all of a sudden everybody was getting this information, what's the proportion of people that will benefit? My guess is 20%, maybe.
Okay.
And then you'll still have this big cohort of people who will just not apply the advice.
Yep.
And I think the reasons for that are very complex. They're health economics, their psychology, their behavioral change. And I think we haven't cracked those things fully.
Yeah.
And that'll be a long, long way to come until we can actually have an impact on everyone.
Yeah, there's no lazy man approach. There's no machine that you can hook up to yourself and provide the same benefits as regular exercise and sunshine.
Yeah.
Like there's no real good replacement for getting out into nature. There's no real good replacement for exercise. When we invent those, that other 80% will probably get better.
Yeah.
So talk me through the inflammation component of when you guys are looking deeper at in like test results aspect. What are the biggest things that you guys are seeing as far as getting people stimulated within your test? Is it the cardiovascular side? Is it the diabetes side? Is it the cancer side? Like what has that mix been for you guys?
So most of our work, research-wise, for the last 15 years has been cardiometabolic. So we have the most amount of publications around cardiovascular disease and diabetes. None of this is yet in clinical application, meaning it's not used in routine healthcare. But what we started with commercially is actually this general aging clock, or a number for your biological age. And then we expanded it, similar to what the genomic space did, where you're quoting different research papers. So up to date, we've published over 300 peer-reviewed papers.
Wow.
With top universities from Harvard, Stanford, Yale. We collaborated with pretty much everyone because we're unique in this capability to look at glycobiology, and that's something we can tap into as
Yeah.
we go down into the biology behind inflammation. So from these, you mentioned actually one review paper where we looked at everything that influences this aging clock, these different glycan patterns, what diseases are connected to it. And we discovered it's connected to over 72 different diseases that have been studied to date. And most diseases haven't been studied from a glycan perspective. And then from that, we selected 14 that had the most robust evidence, meaning the largest cohort sizes in the studies, the highest AUC, which is accuracy, sensitivity versus specificity, and were replicated a couple of times. So this is information that we now give to doctors, and these are all private healthcare doctors who can then use it, it's information purposes only, to run additional diagnostics and confirm risk factors and put somebody on a preventive protocol. And now I lost your question from the beginning of it, but I think what drives how would you say it? Now I've been talking Croatian for weeks, so I've lost my English.
You're good.
Yeah, what drives people to it is actually the longevity component. This longevity industry didn't exist when we started. So when we scientifically started in the space, well, first it took us a few years to get to this aging clock. The aging clock is maybe 10 years old now. But when that was published, that was 2013, there was no platform for it. There was no longevity industry. Right. Even the aging research space was so tiny. So we thought, what do you use this for? Maybe forensics, to figure out how old was somebody.
Yeah.
But not really in a health perspective. And then later on, this industry developed because it makes so much sense. It's kind of this first signal that your health is declining is that it's aging. Your body's aging faster than it should be. And that's something that now consumers and, well, people are willing to buy into as a narrative and start as early as they can. And then what disease is important, that really depends on you. You could have more of a genetic predisposition to cancer. And for example, we have a lot of work around IBS, IBD, Crohn's, colitis. And we just published a paper a few weeks ago that took 5 years. The study took 5 years
Yeah.
to finalize, where we also see these changes 5 to 10 years before a diagnosis. And the glycans were actually not just a biomarker, but they participated in disease development. And IBS, IBD is a risk factor for colon cancer.
Right.
So if that's something that you have in your family history, then this will be relevant to you. But then if you have more family history of cardiovascular disease, that element will be relevant to you, or diabetes and so forth. So it's really individual to you. And it in a way, doesn't matter what the disease is. It's more what you're afraid of, what you have in your family history, that would drive people to a preventive approach.
Yeah, and I think it's so important too. It's one of the things that I've had over 10,000 patients in my career, and a vast majority of people, when it's a lifestyle related condition, they start feeling symptoms and they're always just told that they're crazy and that they should ignore it. Like there's always this, we never talk about it, but there's a time lag to diagnosis. And that's what's so exciting to me about this is that, that it used to be 11 years on average to get diagnosed with an inflammatory condition. It's 10 years to get, diagnosed with diabetes. And in the meantime, the doctor always just goes, well, your thyroid looks like it's going in the wrong direction. Come back next year for another test and we'll see if it's bad before we do anything. It's like the biggest joke in healthcare, right? Like it's, boy, yeah. So that's the saving grace of this test. So I'm super excited to learn a little bit more. So what kind of the chemistry behind this? Describe a little bit of the biology of how this actually works so that people can understand. I want to get deep, but not too deep that the average person still can't understand it. So I'm sure you've had this explanation asked of you several times. So I'm sure you've got it down on how you can explain it. But
yeah. So let me know if I'm complicated, because sometimes I go too deep in. So just feel free to stop me. And what you were talking about healthcare, that's the joke I always have. We have this very predictive marker for hypertension. I'm like, yes, if we gave it to physicians today that are just standard physicians, they'll just say, great, look, I've just done this test says that you'll have hypertension in 6 years. Come back in 6 years, and I know what to prescribe you. But in between that time frame, because doctors are so busy firefighting at the end, where their patients are so sick, if you come in and you're half well in a way, or you have risk factors, they just don't have the time for you, or they're so strained doing other things. So I think we need this new generation of doctors and new generation of healthcare, and we do need the doctors, because part is the individual implementing lifestyle changes, but part is the doctor explaining what it is. Because if the physicians are not familiar with their science, and we haven't yet done enough educational work to have them on board, and then people go to the doctor with this information, they'll just say discard it, it's a commercial gimmick. And it's not. We have so much good, this is generations of research behind it, that's really good science that you can't dispute. We just need time with doctors to educate them enough so they're confident saying, look, this means that you have a risk factor for this disease, and the time to act is now, and this is what you should be doing. And if we look at how long it took physicians to accept genetics in healthcare, like now we do a little bit of pharmacogenomics, but this is predominantly done in private healthcare. It's not really done in public healthcare, which means that even now, for drugs that we know there's a genetic component, majority of the time, you're just given the drug and hoping you're going to respond. And if you don't, then maybe they will investigate if there's no alternative and so forth. So we're very poor in adapting new technologies into healthcare. And this is something radically new that requires a lot of education, because it's basically, so glycans are complex sugars. And whenever we say sugars, people start to think about sugars they're familiar with. So they think about dietary sugars. And if you're talking to a doctor, they think about how your body responds to sugars you eat, which is a process called glycation. or something that would lead to diabetes. So if you have this kind of dysregulated glucose response, you create this damage to your proteins, which would destabilize them and later on lead to diabetes. But actually, all of that has nothing to do with glycobiology or these complex sugars that we evolved, that we create, so they have nothing to do with your diet. You manufacture them when your molecules are being developed, and all of your cells are coated in these sugars that you manufactured to enable your cells to communicate. So the reason we have these complex sugars is to enable multi-cell life. And when we look at from where multi-cell life started, this is where glycobiology started. This is a language, a sugar language that we evolved to enable our biology to communicate on a multi-cell level. And on top of proteins, these are post-translational modifications, which is complex, which means they're partially influenced by genetics. So there's a template, but then they're also influenced by your epigenetics. So this is your past environment, all the way from when you were in your mother's womb to today, and then also your environment. So they're this most dense information set we have in biology to enable things to work, incorporating all of these different influences. So that gives us, let's see, how do we explain this simply? So let's just simply call it function of molecules. We can define, by looking at glycans, we can define function of molecules. And what we predominantly do in diagnostics today is we look at different levels of molecules in your blood, proteins and lipids, and we don't know their function. We just know that you have an abnormal level of a certain molecule in your blood, of a certain protein.
Yep.
And that already means that a certain organ has lost function. You've decompensated to a point that this organ cannot sustain itself properly anymore, so you need a drug intervention to rebalance it and keep a person functioning, not healthy, but functioning for the remaining of their lives. If we look at this glycan perspective, you look at this language around the molecules, you start to understand its function before the organ decompensates. So we can preempt this problem way, way ahead of time. And I think maybe an example for you, and I don't know if your listeners are a physician, but one of the nice analogies we use is PSA. So PSA is this, it's a protein marker used to identify if somebody might have prostate cancer.
Yep.
But it's very poor in accuracy. So its AUC is 0.6, which means that almost half of the time it gives you the wrong information.
Yep.
So physicians don't generally like to run it, but this is the only thing we have. And you're looking at a level of a molecule. If you look at glycans on the same molecule, because most proteins are glycosylated, so PSA is also glycosylated, all of a sudden this AUC jumps to 0.95 in being accurate. Now, this is, again, scientific development. We don't have it yet in clinic, predominantly because you do not have equipment, trained staff. You don't even have machines to look at glycans. We would adopt a genetic analyzer, creating our own chemical kits to be able to look at glycans. So there's a big, big path until this becomes routine healthcare. But the science right now is incredibly promising in us being way more predictive ahead of time, and then also way more accurate in what problem somebody might develop.
Yeah, it's I believe signaling, I just generally call it signaling, is that, you know, one of the four cornerstones of the future of healthcare is the neuro component, the electricity component, the signaling component, and all of these are like the foundation, and that's why that I was so excited to learn more about this. Is so what you're saying is that the communication pathways between the molecules in our bodies are already starting to tell us that things are going wrong, which is what I love about this test, and I love about this thought process, is because there are so many false positives. Like if we look across the board and all the different inflammatory arthritises, there's all these molecules that we think we can look at, but they're giving us such misleading information, and that's why it takes so long to diagnose people. So very genuinely excited to get this out to the masses. What is the big hurdles, do you think, that your company is going to have to go through Like, at what level is it going to start to be accepted in hospitals where people are going to be able to actually utilize this? What's your big hurdle?
Oh, it's going to be a lifelong journey, I think, for me and maybe my future generations. We don't know this. It's unfortunately such a slow industry. Sometimes we have these radical shifts, like COVID created a radical shift for some
Yes.
technologies, and maybe there will be something like that that happens on our side. But I think the path is going to be long for this whole potential of the technology. So we have to take it in different small steps, or we have to go disease by disease and introduce different indications in healthcare one by one. And
Yep.
each of these introductions is, let's say, 5 years long from when we register it as a clinical marker to when it's actually implemented at a certain scale. And then maybe we get resources to get to the next one if the first one is successful. So I think it's quite a path. We're
Yeah.
lucky to be in this longevity space, which is in a way considered general wellness. And there is a developing market for that, and it's all private healthcare. And in that point, we can, especially to longevity physicians, we can try and translate that science early. But this is all private practice. This is all for
Yep.
people who can actually afford it. Within healthcare, the most developed diagnostic candidates we have are for prediction of diabetes and prediction of cardiovascular disease. And these are already fully scientifically validated. What they need is clinical validation and then adaptation in healthcare. And that's once you've proven out accuracy, performance, you've sorted all the logistic components, you have to get doctors on board. You have to have them used in practice for a period of time, and you have to show benefit of it.
Yep.
And then also for healthcare to apply it, you have to show that it will reduce, it will be cost saving for the healthcare system. And
Right.
that's let's say that's the most challenging part, because once you've done all
Just
the
small little
scientific,
test
clinical,
list. No big
regulatory
deal.
steps, you still need to show that this is going to. And there's places in the world where you don't. There's places in the world that once you develop the marker clinically, it gets adopted straight away, and that's the Middle East. They're ready to adopt. They do not care about health economics like other places in the world. They mainly care about keeping their population healthy, or giving them the most advanced healthcare they can get their hands on. Singapore, and a couple more. So these are a few places where early on this can be healthcare, and these are a few places that we are, of course, doing a lot of development. But if
Right.
we talk about most of Europe, or let's say we just focus on the US, that's where all the heavy lifting will always be heavy lifting. So we're choosing between what is our first clinical indication. So what is going to be the first clinical marker that we start to introduce into routine healthcare. And we decided on menopause as being this kind of traditional marker, because we always saw this gender difference in aging when it comes to the immune system. And men would move in a straight line. They age in a straight line. Women generally look more favorable to men. Their immune systems do, pre-menopause. And then in this transition period, perimenopause to menopause, they have this acceleration of inflammation or inflammaging. And also women would have then less chronic disease prior to menopause, and post-menopause they have more. And although they live longer than men, they have more chronic disease in this post-menopause space.
Right.
And menopause is treated within healthcare, and we have a biomarker to detect it early. So in perimenopause, when your estrogen is just declining, and believe it or not, menopause is not diagnosed by any biomarker at the moment, not accurately, not in this early stage. And it's now diagnosed retrospectively, meaning once a woman has not had a cycle for a year and a day, then she is in menopause. But up to 10 years before that, she could be having symptoms of menopause or estrogen decline, that she can go to a doctor 10 times and they won't be able to tell her what it is. Because you can't measure estrogen directly. Estrogen behaves like this, and it changes from 50 to 1,000 within a cycle. And then this normal reference range for estrogen is between 50 and 500. in the first 3 days of your cycle, if you have a cycle. So defining what is a normal range of estrogen in a woman is incredibly difficult by running a direct hormone test. But as soon as your normal starts to decline, inflammation goes up. And that's what we would really see. We would identify as soon as your hormones are out of balance, we see that going up. And then as soon as you reintroduce hormones, so either you balance somebody's lifestyle or you put them on estrogen, which is what is recommended in perimenopause, menopause, the inflammation goes down. So that's the first clinical marker that we'll introduce into healthcare, because there's this nice application for women's health. And then when we go into cardiovascular disease, we also see a gender difference. And we see a different pattern, and it's also more accurate in predicting heart attack or stroke in women. So we believe that if we start with women's health in clinic and then go on to women's health and cardiovascular disease, we do men at the same time. But we build awareness and education around women, because that's where the gap is. So if you look at cardiovascular events, women have a 50% increased likelihood of mortality due to misdiagnosis and different symptoms. And you don't have gender-specific biomarkers for cardiovascular disease at the moment.
It's one of my big struggles as when I work with people is that the women that I work with always have no idea that women are at an increased risk of things. And because in America, we think of like it's been portrayed in media in America that people who die of heart attacks are fat old men, and the women, like there's no discussion. There's no aspect of cardiovascular health for women here in America. And it's a super sad, it's a very difficult thing as a provider to see is that it's almost never a conversation when a woman is working with me. It's always about her thyroid, because in America, every female talks about thyroid, but no one, because that's kind of like the label during perimenopause that, oh, your thyroid must be bad. And it doesn't show clinically bad, but it's like 100% a dismissive thing that I see. So man, I am so excited for what you guys are doing in women's health. That's really exciting to hear. I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, that's something we're developing in the background clinically. It's going to still take years until we're, but
come on, get it
the
out there.
first one we're going with.
Oh, that's funny. Have you connected with people in New Zealand? New Zealand is one of my favorite countries for, thinking of when I think of health and overall happiness and different things like that. Yeah. Is their system receptive to this type of thing?
Oh, we haven't, in short, and I don't know if we have the capacity to, because we're currently stretched from Europe, UK, US, and Middle East. I officially live on 3 continents at the moment.
Come on, you've got to expand. Let's go.
I don't think I can add any more so far, but we have this research institute, which is still just a research institute with 60 scientists. And they are moving around the world as we're implementing this in different research and clinical labs. So if you know of any researchers or interesting labs that want to explore new technologies, we probably have a few young scientists who might be willing to move to New Zealand. So
got it.
Keep that in mind, and maybe
interesting.
Maybe we can.
You should connect with their. They have a really amazing functional medicine program in their chiropractic school there, and they may be really interested in supporting you through research. Random fact. I was looking at going and doing an internship there when I first graduated chiropractic school, because they had such a unique perspective on health. So random thought, if you wanted to add another country to your list of cool places to fly to.
Well, we can always do research. So officially, we've shipped our testing kits to over 60 countries so far.
Nice.
So we have this, we tested a sample, it's dry blood stains. We tested it in the post for 2 weeks up to 60 degrees Celsius, and it was stable.
Nice.
We removed certain elements that were unstable, and we can get the same result. So we send it to Japan, everywhere pretty much.
Oh, that's great to hear.
So we can work with New Zealand, and they can even send us the frozen samples. I think what was the maybe furthest place we got frozen samples from, I'm not too sure, but we did get 20,000 samples from China in the last
Oh,
10
wow.
years. So I think getting research samples from China is incredibly difficult, much more difficult than
Yeah.
any other place, I would assume. So we can probably do some good quality research, and we have studied over 31 different population globally so far. So cohorts, research cohorts from over 31 different countries so far. So yeah, definitely keen to do. And I think New Zealand has a very big obesity problem.
Mm.
And that's a complex, Australia similarly to that. And that's probably some to do with their genetic history and then this introduction of the Western diet. And
Yeah.
but
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a whole nother fun conversation of what our modern day food system has done.
yeah,
Actually, that would be really interesting. So, are you familiar with the Price Pottinger Foundation?
no,
They're an American foundation. Dr. Price and Dr. Pottinger were the original doctors who traveled the world in the early hundreds to do kind of a big global research study on how diet and sugar, like refined flour and refined sugar, affected populations. And so what they did is they went to all of the untouched indigenous tribes across the world, and they have this big manual. It's like the D book, degenerative degradation, something of that nature. But they did this in-depth analysis of their teeth, their bone structure, their width of their feet, like all of these just global metrics around these indigenous tribes. And then they actually even found tribes that had half and half of their population had moved towards a city. And then they even found
yeah,
genetic twins in Africa, where one of the twins stayed in the
yeah.
original tribe and one of the twins went to a city. So they have all these amazing foundational research. Anyways, I'm kind of digressing because it's a really cool book, but
Oh no,
um, yeah,
that sounds
it would be
great.
interesting to apply that thought process with what you guys are doing. Of if you were to look at culturally, segment out the Middle East, segment out America, and then do a comparative analysis of average diet style to average glycan age and their signaling. That would be a really fun research project. I don't know, just the geeky side in me, that's where I go.
Like, well, like, if you can dig out the study for me and send it over, I can email them and see if they have some samples preserved, and maybe we can actually follow up with their
Oh,
research. But we
this
did
was
do
from the
something
early
similar.
1900s. So yeah, the Price
Oh,
Pottinger
they
Foundation
probably
is.
don't have.
Yeah, there's no samples. I mean, they do have a big museum of like
Yeah,
bones and stuff that they collected, but it's
no.
actually all categorized into a textbook that you can get.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll send you the link offline. I'll post it into the show notes as well. They're also the ones, if you've ever done, they did a study of 10 generations of cats where they fed a control group of raw food and a non-control group of like condensed milk and processed foods. And within the first 3 generations, the group of cats that grew up off of the processed foods had all
Yeah.
sorts of allergies, bone deformation, neurological conditions. Like everything that we're seeing as Americans is like word for word what happened to these cats. And then the really good positive news is that when they switched them back over to the raw diet, it took 5 generations and it reversed everything back into the natural setting to the way the cats originally were before they had processed foods. And so it's a really cool study to look at from a longevity standpoint that way of just how important our food system actually is in messaging that we actually get this epigenetic sharing of 3 to 4 generations of disease that get passed down, but yet it's still reversible. So for our future generations can actually be affected.
5 generations sounds like a very, very long time frame to me. Maybe I can tell you about what we did do on this multi-generation. So we did this global study of lifespan and health span with over 30 different populations from Thailand to Papua New Guinea to Uganda, pretty much everywhere. And then in the UK, we had a cohort of immigrants, 3 generations or it was 2 generations of 3 different immigrant groups. It was British Indian, British Caribbean, and then a Caucasian immigrant group that I forgot which one it was. But in the first generation, their immune systems would look like their original country. In the second generation, their immune systems would look like as if they were white British. So your
Yeah.
immune system can shift within one generation in your environment. And then when we look at what was the factor for lifespan in all of these different populations, the biggest factor was the development index of a country. So socioeconomic factors seems to outweigh genetics. And of course, you have anomalies. So blue zones are anomalies where you have a very low development index and you have very high lifespan in certain small groups. So it's not throughout the country, it's in certain locations, like in Costa Rica, it's the Nicoya Peninsula, or it's the Okinawa in Japan, and so forth. So it does seem like this wealth of a country is not the main factor, but for some reason, when we transition into this developing world of cheap foods and all the things that come with modern life, that seems to shorten our lifespans initially, until you get to a certain income bracket and the country gets to a certain income bracket.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I would love to check that stuff out.
I will send over the paper.
Yeah, very cool. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. I'm excited to share this with my tribe of people. What is the best way to follow you and the company and learn more about this a wonderful progression in humanity, really, is what it is.
Thank you. So I think we're quite active on LinkedIn as a company. So we have a company profile where we update both with recent papers and also education around the space. I can't say that I'm very active on socials. I try to avoid it. I think my life
Yeah,
is hectic as it is. But our chief scientific officer publishes all of the papers on his socials. That's actually the way I learn about what's being published. So it's Twitter or his LinkedIn. I'm like, oh, great. I didn't know this was live already.
that's
So
awesome.
I would definitely actually, for science updates, I would follow him, and he's my dad. So his name is Gordon, and then he has my surname.
Got it.
Um, and then for general company, I would just stick to our LinkedIn, and we also have an active Instagram, so your preferred uh, media. And then any questions you have, any of the social platforms, we will always write back, and
Yeah.
you can always reach
Well,
out
I
to me
have to
directly
say
as well.
the customer support that I've received has been amazing from you guys. Very proactive and very on top of things. So I've been very happy with the results that I've seen through the company. So you're doing a good job.
Thank you.
It's clear that it's a top-down, energetic passing of making everyone inspired and everyone's on the same mission to really help people. So it's exciting.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, thank you
Absolutely.
for taking the time for the interview. This was lovely.
Yes, thank you. And I'm glad you did this out in nature because it just kind of fits of everything that we're talking about is you got to stay healthy when you can.
And you have mountains here somewhere. I don't know if you can see them, but they're
Oh,
quite
yep.
lovely.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Very, very cool. Yeah, get all that good messenger information from the plants and well, enjoy the rest of your day. And hopefully people will link and connect up with you and get the test. That's what this is all about. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it.